But Tokyo activates an alert in its northern regions, urging people to evacuate or take shelter, as Pyongyang fires a missile that, for the first time since 2017, passes over Japanese territory.
Well, for more on North Korea's latest missile launch, we're joined now in the studios live by Sean King. He's a senior vice president at Park Strategies and visiting fellow at RSIS. Mr. King, thank you for joining us this evening, and it's good to see you. So this launch, predictably, quickly condemned around the world, but it also comes less than a month from when North Korea gave itself the right to use nuclear strikes preemptively should it wish to. Now, you've said that your reading of that new law is that the cost for North Korean arms reduction of any size at all, has now risen. Is this most recent missile launch business as usual, as some say, or do you read more into it?
Well, we have to remember that in January 2021, Kim Jong-un said North Korea was now on a 5-year weapons modernization program. So this is part of that. And maybe that was delayed a bit by the pandemic, but it's game on again. And I think his lesson from Hanoi is whenever he sits down with the United States, he's going to come back better armed and stronger and be able to strike a better deal in his eyes. So that's why I say the price for any arms reduction will go up. What's interesting about this is, like you said in the lead, it's the first time it's gone over Japan since 2017. And, you know, no offense to South Korea, but Japan is clearly the U.S. top ally in Asia. We have 50,000 troops there, and MacArthur launched the Incheon landing out of Japan. So Japan would be critical to any defense of the South should North Korea invade again. And I think they see a more Japan-friendly president in Seoul. And just last week, we had trilateral military exercises with the U.S., South Korea, and Japan, and North Korea would have taken notice of that. So I think the real news about this test is that it went over Japan.
But this has happened before. So 2017, as you mentioned, you had 2 missiles going over Japan. A week after that, a nuclear test. Are we going to be seeing that happening again this time, another nuclear test? And should that happen, what does that really say? We're getting inured to these missile tests, but where are we headed? Is it time? When is the time to really take any action, assuming there is action that we can take?
Well, I think we've all learned the lessons that we speculate and predict North Korean behavior at our peril. So I expect that test at some time in the future. When, I know that's kind of a wimpy answer. When, I don't know. But I think the time, it's already past time that we should take North Korea's nuclear program very seriously. But I don't expect any kind of preemptive strike from the South or United States. But I think there's going to be a furious reaction should that nuke test happen.
We talk about these potential reactions, but Pyongyang's strategy for North Korea, for its weapons development, it's very clear, as you said in your first answer. And they've seen that it's also a reliable tool to perhaps frame the behavior or the reactions of the United States and its regional allies.
Yeah, people call North Korea's nukes defensive. I think of them as offensive. They say it's to prevent a U.S. trying to topple the regime. If that were our goal, we would have done it before they had nukes. Their conventional deterrent on the DMZ, the 4th largest standing army in the world, 28 miles from downtown Seoul, and they've already attacked once. That's deterrent enough. And if we look at the Ukraine example, it's not that Ukraine doesn't have nukes, it's that Moscow does. They can take this offensive action knowing we won't strike back because they have nukes. And I think the North Korea long game is to get the United States off the Korean Peninsula. And should they intimidate or, heaven forbid, attack the South again, would we risk San Francisco for Seoul and put our troops in harm's way and the U.S. homeland in harm's way? So I see the nukes as offensive and part of a greater scheme to rid the Korean Peninsula of U.S. influence.
So what we've heard from South Korea and Japan from this latest test, Japan defense minister saying that he will not rule out any options, including counterattack capabilities. The prime minister saying this is outrageous. The South Korea side saying they promise resolute action from all parties. Is this just rhetoric? Is this any stronger than you might expect? Do you see this translating into any different action than we've seen so far?
Well, South Korea has already dropped some bombs today, and I've heard Kishida announce new exercises with the United States this week. And, you know, we talk about sanctions, but we're not going to get anything through the UN because mainland China and Russia are going to block it. we could try some sanctions our own, but I think the only thing that would have a real impact at this time is if we were to sanction the PRC banks handling the Kim regime's cash. Until then, it's pretty much all talk. But I don't expect any kind of military strike against the North, not yet.
Well, could there be more effective responses? Because, as you say, I mean, we talk about sanctions, and Wei Su mentioned it before. Many become inured with what we're seeing with the sort of the prolific nature in which we see these missile tests occur. And we see the diplomatic rebukes, we see the sanctions coming in. Again, we saw that today. How effective are they?
Well, they have to have somewhat of an effect because God knows how much further along they would be without the sanctions. You know, not the same situation, but people for decades said that sanctions on South Africa had no effect. And then all of a sudden the regime collapsed. Sooner or later, they got to have some effect. And again, how much further along would they be without those sanctions? But again, until we start really getting at Kim's cash, which goes through mainland Chinese banks, I don't think he's going to pay attention.
So you could either sanction Chinese banks or you could get Beijing on side and be prepared to act in concert, as it were. And Beijing right now is not going to be acting in concert with Washington or Tokyo or probably even Seoul at this point. So the China factor, which as recently as 2018, we're still saying we could look to China to solve this problem for us. Where's China on solving the North Korean issue?
We're in this situation because China supported North Korea in the Korean War and rolled back U.S. advances. Remember, we had liberated Pyongyang at one point in 1950. We were already talking about a free, united Korea. And now they backstop and guarantee. They can't tell North Korea what to do because it's an ethno-nationalist, go-it-alone regime, but they're always going to be there to bail them out. And Kim Jong-un knows that. And I think with everything going on in Taiwan, trade, whatever else, I don't think we can count on any cooperation from Beijing, and we can rely on them and Moscow to veto anything at the Security Council and the UN.
Mr. King, thank you very much for joining us in the studios today to share your perspectives with us on what's occurred with this missile strike over Japan by North Korea. That was Sean King, the Senior Vice President at Park Strategies and Visiting Fellow at RSIS.